If I can't sleep, I turn on the news.
I don't blame you.
I go right to sleep.
All right. We are going to go ahead and hopefully get started. Yep. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I will mention once again that we are trying to live stream this. I'm hoping it will work. It'll be kind of interesting to see, but I need to get to the right thing here. Okay. So we are at Leviticus chapter 1. And a big part of what we're going to do here is we're going to discuss the rules that they set up for the sacrifices, but more important, the why. Okay, that's kind of what I'm hoping is to help deal with the reason why God set it up this way and the reason that it worked out. Now, remember that at the end of Exodus, which we did last week, we found the setup of the tabernacle. We finally set up the tabernacle for worship. God has entered the tabernacle.
Yeah.
So Leviticus begins as God is telling Moses how to do the day-to-day sacrificial work for the people. Now remember, one of the major elements of the sacrificial system is substitution. It is, you are killing this animal in substitution for your own sin. Okay. That is not all of it. And as we kind of move first, that is not necessarily what this first one is. The first one is simply a burnt offering. Okay. So in chapter 1, verse 1, it says, the Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering to the Lord, okay, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock. Okay, so the first segment of the burnt offering is either ox or cow. Okay, probably more so ox than cow in this culture.
Yeah.
Then the second one is sheep or goat. So ox or cow are the herd.
Oh,
Sheep and goat is the flock. Okay. So if his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer a male without blemish. Okay. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. Okay. So this tells us the process. You bring this. Now, remember, and we'll get to this later, that they are camped around the tabernacle.
yeah.
So they would bring their animal from the herd, their cow or their ox, whichever it was. They would bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then they would lay their hand on the top of it. Okay. Now, the purpose of this is, and notice, they're laying their hand on the head, and symbolically they are transferring their sin to the animal.
I got a question.
Yes.
Mine says you should bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle. Is the tabernacle and the tent of meeting?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
It's the place of God's presence.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So they put their hand on the head of the burnt offering. It shall be accepted for him to make atonement. Now, remember, this word is critical to all of this. Atonement. Okay. Atonement means payment.
Say it, Joe.
What does it say?
Mine says, lay your hand on the animal's head, and the Lord will accept its death in the place to purify you, making right with.
There it is. But that's what atonement means.
Okay,
Okay. So to atone means to make right.
gotcha.
Okay. So in fact, we even still use it in legal terms that, well, you stole something, so you have to atone for what you did.
Gotcha.
You have to pay back. So in a way, some of the stuff that you went through in the last year and a half were atonement for something that you did.
Yes.
Okay.
Which I'm almost done with.
With you're almost done with. Okay. So then he shall kill the bull before the Lord. Now, this adds something you need to notice. It's a male without blemish. It is also, at least, and whether they did that at the level that we do now, we're not talking a steer.
No, it says.
We're talking a bull.
What's the difference between a steer?
A steer has had its testicles cut off, crushed.
So it's been. A steer's not
It's
a
been-
bull anymore.
It's been sterilized.
Okay. It's been neutered.
It's been neutered.
Okay.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way this kind of works is a steer is only useful for meat.
Okay.
Okay. So really, a lot of times in ranching in our country, they will have 1, 2, 3 bulls that do the impregnating, and then they'll take most of the other male animals and they will sterilize them. And then what they do is when they're grown, then they send them off for slaughter. Right. So you keep the heifers because they give birth.
Yeah.
You keep the bulls because they impregnate the heifers to get pregnant, and the steers are used to sell.
Gotcha.
But in this case, we are talking about even that is not appropriate to give as a sacrifice. Okay. So when it says without blemish, it also means with its parts intact.
With it completely intact. Okay.
Okay. Kill the bull before the Lord. By the way, that also says something else. That means it's a much more expensive sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because a bull is more valuable than a steer. Okay. Aaron's son shall bring the blood. And by the way, you will see this over and over again. And it says that this process is bloody.
Yeah.
Aaron's son's priest shall bring the blood and throw the blood against the sides of the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So this is the altar, the bronze altar, the altar of burnt offering. Okay, so really you're talking about this is part of the atonement process. Okay, then they cut the burnt offering into pieces. Okay, the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. And the sons of Aaron's sons, the priest, shall arrange the pieces, the head, the fat on the wood that is in the fire of the altar.
Oh, that's cool. That's pretty neat.
Okay.
I like your illustrated one.
But they will fully, so the idea is they fully butcher the animal.
Yeah, cut it to pieces.
Okay. And in this particular one, none of it is kept.
Okay.
Okay. So they cut it, they put everything on. Now, interestingly enough, it says, but its entrails, the internal organs, they wash before they put them on the fire.
Why?
Probably so they're clean. Think about what comes through the entrails.
But they're gonna burn it anyway.
But this is God's plan.
Okay.
Okay. This is how God set it up. Okay. They wash the entrails with water, and the priest shall burn all of it on the altar.
Mine says also the legs.
This one, it is everything. Okay. Right. Now, this particular one apparently is a burnt offering. The way this is dealt with is a burnt offering for the sin of the whole. Okay.
For like all of Israel?
Well,
or just for their tribe?
For their family, I
Okay.
guess. And it may be more personal than that, but the idea is it is a sin offering. So watch. When it's a sin offering, and you'll find this throughout, typically a sin offering is completely consumed.
Okay.
Okay. So you don't take any of it back.
So they burn it to us completely.
Right. Okay. And in fact, it will tell us later that they take the ashes from it and they bury it outside the camp. So there is a point here that's important. What it says, and as we go forward, we'll see this again with some of the other sin offerings. God takes sin very seriously. And so the substitute for sin has to be completely consumed and taken out of the camp. It has to be removed. You can't take any of it back.
Gotcha.
Okay. So it goes on and it says, it is a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Now, this is an interesting element to this. Okay, because we'll get it here in a few minutes with the grain offering. One of the big things that it mentions over and over again is a pleasing aroma.
Yeah,
So let's be completely fair. When you are grilling meat,
it is a pleasing.
it smells good, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. But one of the major elements about this, and I'm sorry, I've got to grab a Kleenex. One of the elements in this that we need to understand is the concept of cost. Okay. So I'll give you this. This comes up forward a few hundred years to David. And David has sinned. And David is coming to the altar to make atonement. And one of the guys goes, hey, I'll provide he goes, I want to build an altar here and I want to sacrifice. And the guy goes, well, but David goes, I want to buy the land. I want to buy the animals. And the guy goes, no, you're the king. I'll just give it to you. And David says something very important. He goes, who am I that I would give an offering to the Lord that didn't cost me anything?
Makes sense.
Okay. Now watch, because this is important to this throughout all of this. When it says a male without blemish, what does it mean? It means the best of your herd.
Perfect.
So you don't offer to God the little lame lamb that is going to die in 2 days anyway. Why? Because that costs you very little. You take the one that
Cream of the crop.
the cream of the crop, and you offer it before the Lord. Now, to bring that into the New Testament, let's make sure we understand. Jesus is a lamb without blemish. He's the best that could be offered. And by the way, that also means that guess what God did for our salvation? He gave his best. So, and I know this sounds weird, and I am fully aware that Christ is the only Son of God and all of those things, but it's not like God gave the redheaded stepchild.
Yeah.
He gave the heir.
Yeah.
And that is part of the discussion here, is that atonement always has a cost.
He gave his one and only son, and if it's the only son you have,
It's the best.
it's the best.
Mhm. And remember that it's clear he was without blemish.
Yes.
Okay. So we have the bull or we have the bull. Then we have the flock. So if his gift for the burnt offering is from the flock, from the sheep or the goats, he shall bring a male without blemish. So once again, a male, no blemish. He shall kill it on the north side of the altar before the Lord. So there's a little difference here. But once again, Aaron's son, the priest, shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar. Cut it into pieces with its head and its fat. Okay, and the priest shall arrange them. Go ahead.
It doesn't specify what side of the altar, what, like, no, because why is it?
Yours doesn't say that?
It said that on this part.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
on the road.
but not on the bull. Why?
Well, because the bullet says it's at the entrance, so it's on the east side.
Oh, because the entrance is on over the east side. Okay.
The entrance to the tabernacle is always on the east side.
So why this?
I don't know.
Okay, just another one of God's.
Some of it may
One
just be,
reality.
some of it may just be the idea of you have an awful lot of people coming.
Yeah, so we want to keep the door.
And so it may be the idea that on the north side of the altar, and by the way, part of the entrance discussion may be size. Think about the difference in size between a bull
That's true.
ox, a bull cow or bull ox, and a male sheep.
Big difference.
So it may be such that the bull is slayed at the entrance to the tabernacle because of the
Size.
size, whereas it doesn't say that the sheep is murdered on the north side outside of the tabernacle. It may be that they come into the tabernacle, go to the north side of the altar, and that is where they have the priests who are slaying all the sheep.
And I could just picture like big lines of people with oxen and sheep. So
I-
I guess it would.
We're talking a couple million people and a lot of sacrifices every day. Okay, now, not everybody brought a sacrifice every day, but when you count that many people, it adds up,
Well, there's a lot of it having, yeah, so they brought their fruit, didn't they?
right? There's some other there's some other offerings that come into this. Okay, so cut it into pieces, its head and its fat, and the priest shall arrange them on the wood that is on the fire of the altar. The entrails and the legs he shall wash with water. Okay, now, once again, they are washing off the grossness, is how I'm gonna say it. Because it brings up the hind legs.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
probably when they slaughter the bulls and stuff, to get the blood, they let it drain, and they probably don't let you. Right here.
Well, they would have let them drain either way, because that is, well, we know for certain that when it came to eating them, they had to drain everything. They were forbidden to eat meat with blood in it.
Was it for the sacrifice? Like, did they have to be clean?
So
Or sacrifice?
that's part of it. Okay. The ultimate discussion of the blood itself, and we'll get into it, is that all the way back with Cain and Abel, we find something. And it says that when Cain murders his brother Abel, and God comes and says, well, where's your brother? And he goes, well, am I my brother's keeper? What God tells Cain is, your brother's blood is crying out to me. And later, when he's dealing with Abraham and when he's dealing with Moses, he says, you will not eat meat with blood in it, because the life of the animal is in its blood. And so you won't do that. Okay. Oh, you kill an animal, you will drain the blood out of it before you eat it. Now, the truth of the matter is, anymore, that's almost what is always done. Okay. You go hunting and you hunt a deer. The first thing you do is you hang the deer so the blood drains.
Yeah.
But understand that before, and I'll use this phrasing, before Western civilization became predominantly Judeo-Christian, okay, you would find things in a lot of European countries, and still find them some, but understand that Germans had blood pudding
Oh, they still do. Ugh.
and blood sausage.
Ugh.
And so they would eat meat that had all the blood still in it. And we get a little confused when we talk about, cooking a steak, and we say, when it's medium rare, it's still red, and they joke around about bloody. It's not blood.
It's not. I was
No.
gonna ask about that because I like my steak rare where
It's not blood. The blood has been drained out. It's simply juices. It has a red tinge because of, it has a red tinge, but it's not blood.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
If you were eating meat that still had blood, you would know.
Yeah, I
Okay.
don't think I want to. I like my meat from the store things.
Okay. But so I think they would drain it even from the sheep and the goat, but it's so much less than a bull ox.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact to properly drain a bull ox, you're going to have to hang it for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so apparently they had contraptions for that purpose outside the tabernacle.
Like a giant
Mhm.
cherry picker or something. They
Well,
put
that
to-
being, yeah,
Eight
not
frame.
quite a cherry picker, but you know,
But a big egg
but
frame
yeah, I mean,
that you could string it up and hang it.
but the idea is that once again with the goats, you wash the entrails, you wash the legs, okay, because they are considered unclean
Oh, that's
until
right.
they've been
It's
washed.
all about queen.
Okay. Remember, and it's funny later that we find this, but in Ezekiel, we have this moment where God goes, hey, I want you to, as an object lesson for the people, he says, I want you to cook your food on a fire made from dung.
That would
Okay.
taste gross.
So, well, not necessarily. It wouldn't be wonderful, but it was something that could be done because once it dries out, it's got a lot of plant matter and all of that.
Yeah.
People use it to heat their house and stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
But it smell.
A lot of pioneers.
once it's dry, not so much.
Okay.
It's very flammable. Where it holds a lot of heat.
Yeah. I mean,
Some of the pioneers had to use it because there wasn't any wood around,
mhm.
and that was one thing that could be.
I mean,
Cow patties.
it's funny that we talk about that, but if you've been in areas that have a lot of cattle, once they're completely dried, they don't smell anymore. I mean, they have competitions where they throw them
Are you
like
serious?
frisbees.
Grass and water.
It's grass. I mean, it's partially digested grass and water, especially when you're talking about a cow.
Okay.
But Ezekiel actually goes far enough to go, well, please let me use cow dung instead of human dung because I don't want to be unclean. Okay, so there's some discussion there, but it's just a matter of making it clean ceremonially. So you wash the back legs, you wash the
Gotcha.
entrails. Okay. And then you offer it, you cut it up, you burn it on the fire, all of it. And once again, it's a pleasing offering to the Lord.
Decent
Okay.
aroma.
And it provides atonement. Now, there is another reason why there are these three different versions, and we're about to get to the third one. A bull costs more than a sheep or a goat.
Yes.
Then later it says if his offering to the Lord is burnt offering of birds. Okay. Now I want you to see this because it's very important. God is providing for them to receive atonement no matter what their financial situation is. So it really is this. If you are wealthy enough that you have a bunch of cattle, bring a bull. If you can't afford a bull, if you just absolutely can't afford a bull, then bring a goat or a sheep. If you can't afford either, then bring a bird. Because a turtle dove or a pigeon is something that you can just find or buy for inexpensive.
Yeah.
So
basically he's taking out all the excuses
Mhm.
of being able to do these offerings. No more excuses.
But understand, and this is a very important element of this. There is still the idea here of giving, and we call it this, giving sacrificially, that no matter what, it costs you something. Because if you're poor, a turtle dove and a pigeon is a rough If you're, middle class, then a sheep or a goat was a big cost.
Yeah,
If you were wealthy, giving up a bull is a big cost.
gotcha.
So part of this is this: if you need atonement for your sin, it's going to cost something.
And it should,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Okay. So what it says is if you're bringing a bird because that's all you can afford, you bring it, the priest takes it up to the altar, wrings its neck. Okay. By the way, let's just make sure we understand what that means. It means twist the head and pull it off.
Yeah,
Cause they take chickens.
Chicken wouldn't have been a clean animal.
nope, it says pigeon or a turtle, that's
Um,
a pigeon, young pigeon.
I'd have to look and make sure, but I don't think that chickens would have been considered clean.
And it's funny, they say that pigeon is a clean animal because I always thought of them as rats with wings.
Well, they say like, but they'll offer a goat. Why is a goat a clean animal? And
So it's based on a set of criteria. And the criteria set is very specific. So with a 4-footed animal, okay, and let's use it that way. It has to have a cloved hoof and it has to chew the cud. Okay, so a horse doesn't have a cloved hoof. A pig does not chew the cud. A pig does have a cloved hoof, but it doesn't chew the cud.
that's
The
a
clove is like split.
Split.
Like
Okay.
split
A
toe.
camel does not have a hoof at all. They have toes.
Oh, do they? Wonder if that's what he's thinking.
Okay. And I'd have to look to know all the rules, but like for fish, it had to have scales.
There's fish
So
that
no
got-
catfish. Catfish technically don't have scales.
Oh, they don't?
No.
I didn't know
Most
that.
of the fish that don't have scales are bottom feeders, which
Yeah,
means they eat the.
everything on the bottom.
So they were considered unclean.
Well, that's why you stick it in
Okay.
the bathtub and clean it.
Now,
up.
I agree with you. A goat is
Yeah.
not the most clean
Yeah.
animal in its eating, but it still is primarily grass and,
Okay,
okay. So we'll get into those rules later, but the idea always is, and actually, if we really deal with it, there are 3 classifications of animals. Okay. There is unclean. Don't have it in the camp. It is useless to you. Okay. We mentioned earlier, a few weeks ago, that one of the things that archaeologists will look for to find out if a Jewish culture had moved in is suddenly there's no more pig bones. They were not allowed to have them among their people.
because they were unclean.
They were worthless. You couldn't eat them. You couldn't use them for livestock. You couldn't do anything. That's actually the reason why in Jesus's parable of the prodigal son, what does the prodigal son end up taking care of? That is the worst job ever for a Jew. Okay, it's kind of like having the job of cleaning porta potties.
Would suck.
I mean, and by the way, remember, he's so destitute, he's longing to eat the
pigs.
pods that the
Ah.
pigs are eating. Now, let's make sure we understand. It's not slop in the term we say. What they were carob pods. It was a type of seed that survived drought. Okay. But they were so hard and so a pig was almost the only animal who could eat them. Okay. We joke around about a goat eating anything. A pig will
Pig will
eat
eat
anything.
Bones and all, yeah.
Well, so the carob pods that the story tells about, he would not have been able to eat them. So he was jealous of the pigs, is what it's really saying.
Gotcha. Because they could eat all those carrot pods and he was starving.
And so what does he do? He finally comes to his senses and go, what am I doing? I'm starving to death, and my father, even his servants at least have enough to eat. I'll go back and just ask to be a servant. The story of the pigs is to say just how far
He's gone.
he's gone. Okay, so you have the unclean animals, then you have the clean animals, and the clean animals were animals that you were allowed to eat. They were animals you were allowed to keep around for, and by the way, chickens may have well been a clean animal because they definitely ate eggs. Mhm.
But maybe they were pigeon egg.
Well, but what I'm saying is, but then the third classification are the ones that were okay for worship. You had unclean, you had clean, and then you had suitable for worship.
Worship approved animals, which would be the goats.
And the chickens, and the pigeons or turtle doves. Okay, so understand that there are some levels here that we're dealing with. Okay, so you wring its neck, you drain the blood to the side of the altar, then burn it. You shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it beside the altar on the east side. The crop is the way a bird digests, is they have a deal in their throat that carries, and it's really kind of weird. It carries rocks and stuff like that, and that's how they digest. Well, that comes off and is thrown to the east side of the altar in the place for the ashes that'll be taken away. Tear it open by its wings, but you shall not sever it completely. The priest shall burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Okay. So this tells us something about what the sacrificial system was about. It was doing something in payment of your sin that pleased God. Okay. Now, as we begin chapter 2, I had to look this up because I was curious. When anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, now the grain offering couldn't be for sin. The grain offering was just that. It was a grain offering. Okay. His offering shall be of fine flour. So, first of all, if you're bringing a grain offering, you had to mill it. You couldn't, except for a place here in a minute where it will contradict this for a specific situation. You had to mill the flour from the grain. Okay. And you had to do a good job. Had to be fine flour. Then you would pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. Okay. So frankincense is a resin. Okay, from a plant. And it has a really wonderful smell. I went and looked because I was curious. You can eat it. In fact, there are a bunch of deals that say, yeah, if you use frankincense, it'll help with this and help with that. It's one of those essential oils that supposedly has a lot of benefit. But what it says is that you take the flour, then you pour in the flour, oil and frankincense, you bring it to Aaron. Then he takes from it a handful and he burns it on the altar. Now, here's the fun part. As I was looking at this, said, well, why did they add frankincense? Once again, for the aroma. Because guess what? Burning flour doesn't smell all that good.
Yeah, but not.
Okay, but watch. You add oil and you add a strong resin and essential oil to it, and you make it smell good. It's a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Okay, now, but in this case, watch. You bring a quart jar of this oil, this flour mixed with oil and frankincense, and he takes a handful out of it and burns that, and the rest the priests keep.
Yeah, it says it will be considered a most holy part of the special.
Come on,
gifts
you.
presented to the Lord.
Eats it. No,
Oh,
it's
he-
for them to eat. So remember that for the priests particularly, their daily food was presented from the sacrifices of the people.
It's one reason the grain offering and all of that can't be used for a sin offering, is because there's no bloodshed.
Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. Now, understand, and this is an important part of this too, it tells us something that we have to be very careful about. There are those that will try to say, well, obviously Abel brought a blood offering and Cain didn't. Well, clearly a grain offering was perfectly acceptable,
Yeah,
done God's way.
yeah,
So it's not that he brought something. It's not that God expected him to bring something he didn't have.
yeah, and was that a sin offering? I thought that was just a bringing the
We don't
first of
know.
the fruits.
We don't know exactly what the offering was, but what we know is, and by the way, the phrasing's important. It says Abel brought the best of his sheep.
And
Cain brought some of his grain.
yeah, some of his produce, yeah.
Okay, now watch. God gives a specific direction of here's how you bring it.
It's got to be the best of the best.
Okay.
Everything.
Now, here's the funny thing. It says the rest of the grain offering shall be Aaron and his sons. It is most holy. But then it goes on to say, when you bring a grain offering baked. So by the way, you could bake bread and bring it to the Lord as an offering under certain circumstances. It says, if you bring a grain offering baked in the in an oven as an offering, it shall be unleavened. Okay. It shall be unleavened loaves of fine flour mixed with oil or unleavened wafers smeared with oil. Okay. So if it's like and almost, this is the way I would say it, it's not exactly right. But the two things kind of match up with today's ideas of a tortilla and a cracker. If it's a tortilla, then it's mixed with oil in the cooking. If it's a cracker, then you smear it with oil. Either way, there's oil on it. Okay. If your offering is a grain offering baked on a griddle, so by the way, let's make sure we understand. One way to make unleavened bread is to bake it in an oven. It becomes a flatbread. There is also a way of doing it that is often done that you put it on a griddle. And in fact, that is so a hot plate.
Okay.
They would use a stone or a pan.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, if we're going to be fair, kind of like a tortilla,
Gotcha.
because a tortilla is a ball of unleavened, smash it down, and then you put it on a griddle on both sides and cook it.
There's no leaven in tortillas.
No, it shouldn't be. No,
They don't rise.
they don't rise.
Oh,
By the way, let's make sure we understand in our culture today, we do some other different things, but baking soda would have counted as a leavening. Even though it is not yeast, it would have still counted. It's a leavening agent. Okay. Now, it says, you shall break it and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. Okay. And if you're offering a grain offering cooked in a pan, see, so notice he's giving specific instructions based on how you cook it.
which is awesome.
Now,
I didn't live back
the-
then.
But notice, really, the instruction is not that much different.
No.
If it's in an oven, then you mix it with oil or you smear it with oil. If it's in a griddle, you mix it with oil. If it's okay. So you shall bring the grain offering that is made of these things to the Lord, and when it is presented to the priest, he shall bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take from the grain offering its memorial portion and burn it on the altar, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But the rest of the grain offering shall be for Aaron and his sons. It is a most holy part of the Lord's food offering. Okay. Then he goes on and he says, no grain offering that you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven. And you shall burn no leaven nor any honey as a food offering to the Lord. Okay.
Why, honey?
I don't know. I'd have to look. I don't know for sure. But then it goes on in verse 12. It says, as an offering of first fruits, you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not be offered on the altar. So for the first fruits was a particular time you would bring part of your produce.
Yeah.
And at that one time a year, you could bring leavened offering, but it was not to be burned on the altar. Okay. If you're bringing a first fruits offering, which is a particular type, then it was a little different. But then this is the other thing that I thought was funny. Verse 13, you shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offering. With all your offerings, you shall offer salt. Now, there's a couple of things here, and I think they're both important. One is, who gets what God doesn't get?
Aaron and his son.
Do you want to eat bread that doesn't have any salt in it?
I don't know.
Not pleasant. Not pleasant. There's also another thing. Salt in ancient Egypt, ancient Israel, all that was an incredibly valuable commodity. In fact, you will even hear statements, and they've changed a little bit over the years, but the statement that some people will use, he's worth his weight in gold. Originally, it was he's worth his weight in salt. Why? With no refrigeration, how did you keep meat good for any length of time at all? You salted it.
So it was really a preservative as well.
Was a preservative. By the way, if you were to go through even today and look at all the uses of salt, it's incredible. Okay, so flavor. It is used as a disinfectant.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Is that what they mean by rub a little salt in the wound?
It burns like crazy, but it'll kill the bacteria. By the way, whenever you talk about, and I'll use these two examples. When you talk about sauerkraut or kimchi, do you know how they keep it from going bad?
No.
It's a very specific level of salt water.
Oh, I thought it was gonna be.
Because watch, the salt, just the right amount of salt will allow the cabbage to ferment without going bad. Because there are bacteria that can't live in a salty environment. So understand that as much as we sometimes think of salt as just the stuff that sits on our table, it is still incredibly valuable in a lot of places. But at that time, that was a big deal.
Yeah, salt.
So the salt of the covenant, the idea that God's covenant is like salt, it purifies. You will not offer an offering to the Lord that isn't salted.
Unless it's
Well, if it's a food.
okay.
Okay. So notice we've talked about several foods. Talked about bread baked in an oven, baked in a pan, baked on a griddle, you know,
Yeah.
all of those things better be seasoned.
Okay.
There is incredible value to the idea of, once again, you're giving your best.
And it's costing you something because you're giving up a precious commodity.
Mhm. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and do the end of chapter 2, and then we'll be done for tonight. Just because there's so much information here.
Oh, gosh.
If you offer a grain offering of first fruits to the Lord, so this is particularly the first fruits, you shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruits fresh ears roasted with fire, crushed new grain. So the idea here is not quite, but, and I'll make this, whenever you talk about some types of grain, you impart a tremendous amount of flavor on them by heating them. So what it means is you would take the ears of wheat or barley and you would put them in a pan and you would, or put them in a fire and roast them. To be honest, it's a little bit like how we make popcorn.
Okay.
Probably not to the point that they pop, which they will do as well.
Really?
But crush new grain. You put oil on it, lay frankincense on it. It's a grain offering. Okay. So God is very deliberate. He is very specific, and it is to be done his way. Now, this leads to one of the major things we learn in Leviticus that pushes us all the way to Jesus. Okay. God will meet you where you are, but you find favor with God on his terms. God doesn't just accept anything. Now, I want to be clear. He loves you. He wants the best for you. He's pursued you. But to find salvation, to find peace with God, it has to be done his way. And that's what we're learning here. Now, there's a lot more to it, but that's one of the major things we're learning is if you want to meet with God, you meet with God on his terms. Now, the beautiful thing about it is his terms now is through the blood of his son.
Thank God. I don't think I can adhere to all the
Oh, there's some weird ones.
regulations.
Like I said, we're not going to get through all of them. I mean, we saw some in Exodus. I love the one. Don't boil a goat in its mother's milk.
Yeah, like who would even think to cook a goat in its own mom's milk?
Apparently it was a delicacy in the pagan cultures around it.
Probably if you didn't have water to put it in, you put it in milk.
But
That would
by
make
the
sense.
way, the other thing it tells you is this, and don't miss this. One of the things it tells you is about the age of the goat you're eating.
The baby.
You are eating a baby goat at the point where you can still milk the goat from that. See, we're not talking about the same situation that we do often now, where whenever you talk about a cow in a dairy, they have them have a baby and then they milk them for way longer than the calf would drink milk.
Yeah.
And there was some milking done, but the idea is here is you don't do this task where you take an animal that has just been born. And I mean, that's really the idea. An animal that has just been born is incredibly young, and then boil it to eat and boil it in its own mother's milk.
I like veal now.
There's a level of
I
that.
really like veal, but once I found out how they make it, I didn't like it. so
Not
much.
very pleasant.
But I really did like it.
Lady I worked with, she thought she really liked it until we told her what it was, and then she.
Like menudo.
Oh, yeah, I don't eat veal no more, but I used to really like it. So I found out how they make it and I was like, no.
It's a,
It's cruel.
there are some things that are very, very rough, and we're going to see a lot as we go through this. And I know there's a lot of information, it's a lot of detail, and I'm sure some of it go, well, why does that matter? It matters because it teaches us something about who God is. Okay.
Very specific.
the particulars may not be as important that, oh, well, I got to make sure I do it this way or that way because we're under a new covenant, but it tells us something about God, that God is a God of order and God is a God who knows how he wants things done.
And the Jewish people, they still abide by a lot of these rules, right?
Not the sacrificial rules because
But the-
there's no
but the
temple.
food,
Yes.
All that other stuff.
Okay.
Like, who would sign on to be like that? Like to have to worry that much about.
If that's how you please God.
Well, that's how it's
Oh,
raised.
well, okay, well,
But
yeah.
let's make sure we understand and let's go a little bit different direction. You will find those that are within Mormonism are very diligent to follow all the rules. Why? Because if you don't follow the rules, you go to hell. When the rules are how you come to know God, it is much easier to force someone to follow the rules. Well, you know what happens if you don't follow this rule?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what kept me away from religion for
Mhm.
so long is I just don't follow rules very well.
Right.
Like I want to, but I just don't think.
But even in Roman Catholicism, there's a bunch of rules.
Yeah,
And sometimes that turns people off, but there are people that are very devout and they, give up something for Lent every year. And
Yeah.
hear me say this, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you're doing it for the right reason. And doing it just so that you say you follow the rule is not the right reason.
no.
I'll be fair, the concept of Lent is a wonderful idea. Take 40 days before the day we celebrate the resurrection and focus yourself on what God has done for you. That's the purpose of it. But what happens is sometimes we get so bogged down in the rules. Well, I got to give up meat. I can only have fish on Friday, and on Sundays I can go ahead and have meat. And
Wednesday too.
And-
You're not supposed to eat meat on Wednesday.
okay, all of those rules. Then sometimes you lose
Side of why you're doing it.
sight of why you're doing it. And by the way, it happens outside of that. I have met people in churches that, well, why do you come to church? Because I'm supposed to. I have no idea that they're supposed to meet God there. That's what we do.
We go to church.
It's important we go to church. I would be the first one to tell you, you should be in church. But there is a right reason to be in church.
But I think you need to get something out of it. If you
You need to be focused on why you're supposed to be there.
exactly, instead of going because you're
Just
just
because
going.
so-and-so's going.
Yeah.
Mhm. Or, well, I did my good deed.
I'll be real, when I first started coming to church, it was because my kid wanted me to come to church and because it would look good because I'm in the Bible Belt.
Well,
Everybody goes to church.
and so,
I wanna look good.
by the way, let's make sure we understand. There are a lot of people who started going to church for the wrong reasons and God showed them the right reason.
Yes.
I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying, well, if you're here for the wrong reason, you shouldn't be here. That's not,
No.
if you're here for the wrong reason, you probably are the one who should be here.
Totally. I was.
But understand that the ultimate discussion here, and we're going to wrap with this. The ultimate discussion with all these rules and regulations is this. You can't meet all the rules and regulations.
Oh, God, no. There's no way I could.
You can't do it. And so here's where it comes down. These offerings were a way for you to atone for you messing up the rules. But the final atonement comes in the person of Jesus, who is the perfect sacrifice. And so the reason this no longer applies to us is because the sacrifice is done. I don't need to go out and sacrifice a cow anymore because the perfect sacrifice has come.
I got a question. I seen something. I don't even remember where I've seen it. Something about some church coming to Albuquerque and they're gonna do a tabernacle experience. What would that mean, a tabernacle experience?
It depends what group they are.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't catch all that. I just got hung up on the, what do you mean tabernacle experience?
So understand that sometimes we co-opt the words.
Oh,
Okay. So it's the Mormon Tabernacle
yeah.
Choir.
My sister's a
Okay.
Mormon. She goes to tabernacle every week.
Okay. It's not the same thing.
Okay.
When
Okay.
I was growing up, before they really had organized the church at Spring Lake, we met in a tent.
I think that would be cool.
Until we got the church built, but we were made fun of being in a tent.
I think it would be cool, like when we were discussing this morning about is the building the church? No, I'd be cool with meeting outside.
Mhm.
I don't need to come.
Well,
back to
you
the
You see that big thing that's right next to the Methodist church, and
Yes, people think-
it's called a brush arbor. And that's where that church started, was in a brush arbor. That's not the one. They rebuilt it. But that's what it's called. And they had things throughout this area called brush arbor revivals. And they would meet under this kind of weird tent thing. And I mean, it wasn't even a tent, it was just a brush
Yeah,
sunshade is
Yeah.
really what it was.
And there is the people got married over there.
I wanted to get married. under there.
And there's been,
I'm already
Street
married, so.
started in 10.
yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
All I'm saying is that sometimes whenever they say we're going to have a tabernacle experience or even, and this one's one that always makes me laugh, and I'll be fair. We're going to recreate the New Testament church. Okay, what definition do you want of that? So, and it's a big thing in Christianity. Well, what we need to do is re-begin the New Testament church. Okay, that's great.
They're gonna
But
start
how do
over.
you define that? So is that we meet in homes? Okay, that's fine. That's part of it. We're going to meet this day. Well, they met every day.
Yeah, they met every day.
So
They also
sometimes,
sold what they had and distributed among the poor.
so let me say, if we had a group that went in and fully sold into that, that's great and all. But the question still comes back to one simple thing. Are they doing that so they look better? Or are they doing that because that's what God told them to do?
Depends on the person.
Okay. It depends on the motivation of the person doing it. Because here is what Jesus says, and we can't miss this. If you go in and do incredible things of service for God, and you do them so that everybody sees you, and that's why you're doing them, do you know what Jesus says? You got your reward already.
Yeah,
Your reward was the people seeing you because that's what you wanted. But if you want heavenly rewards, he goes so far as to say, make it like your left hand doesn't know what your right hand's doing. Do it in secret. And sometimes it's difficult. But I've known people that, oh my word, they were so generous in secret. You never knew it was them.
that makes me think about all those clips you see like on Facebook where they're like walking around and they're filming, giving all these homeless people money and helping out. all
What do
these
they want?
people.
To prove that they're
Like
doing good
hyping
things?
themselves up. Like, why can't you do that without the cameras? I get caught on those because it's great to see that people are trying to help people, but
It doesn't change. Now, here's the point that it comes down to. It doesn't change the benefit for the people who receive.
no. It just changes
Okay.
the benefit. for
As
you.
as Paul says, he goes, look, if you're preaching the gospel for the wrong motives, you're still preaching the gospel.
Yeah,
You're still doing it for your own good instead of
Right.
doing
So,
the good of God.
Here's what it is. It doesn't mean that you won't help somebody, but it means that you don't get the reward you were hoping for. Or maybe you do get the reward you were hoping for. If I go help somebody because it's what God told me to do, then I receive reward from him. If I do it so everybody in town can know that, oh, the Baptist preacher is so good at meeting people's needs, then guess what the reward I got was? An attaboy.
Boy,
And if all we're looking for is an attaboy, we miss the boat. All right, we're going to stop there and we will pick up at chapter 3. We will go through all the offerings
Two.
and no,
Chapter
we're
three.
we're at chapter 3.
Oh, you're gonna skip two.
No,
Just
we did
these
2. They're short. Yeah, we did 2 chapters. The grain offering was chapter 2. Yeah, they're somewhat short.